Thank you everyone for joining tonight. My name is Roberto. I am Managing Director for Microsoft for Startups, but also chairing the Entrepreneur Committee here at the Capital Club. So it's been an honor to join, in this mission, Vic and the team, Patricia and Patricia and the other team from the Capital Club. Vic is the CEO of the Capital Club, and he's giving a new direction to the club to make this a place, become the pulse of the business, the voice of the business in the region, in Dubai, in the UAE, re-engage with members and attract new members to on value, right? So having conversations that are meaningful and then turn that into actionable insights for the community and for the business here in the UAE. So we have an amazing panel today with amazing people. Let's start introducing who is here today. Maybe Noor, if you want to go first, just a quick introduction from each of you.
All right. Hi everyone, I'm Noor. I run a venture capital firm in Dubai called Global Ventures. We invest across the Middle East and Africa into tech companies that are scaling globally.
Awesome. Marcel.
My name is Marcel. I'm by training a medical doctor who became an entrepreneur and is super happy, never having gone back to medicine. Started investing very early on in the Middle East and Africa. And also, like Mitch, I'm a public speaker, and I'm sort of the guy who cooked up this whole pitch up in the sky thing.
We'll get to that very soon.
Yeah.
Mitch?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mitch. I've kind of made a career of trying to figure out how to get you to watch more and more TV shows and movies, and it comes from the payback of all the TV I watched after getting out of school back in the 60s. And, through that, I've worked in video stores. I had a chain of video stores. I was the video guy at Netflix and my big claim to fame is I hired Ted Sarandos to take my job, and thank God, he did. And then from there, I've, spent my career in companies, a startup called Redbox, which we grew to $1.5 billion a year in revenue, and it's essentially kiosks in every grocery store, Walmart, et cetera, in the U.S. that rents DVDs. And then, I've had my share of failures. A couple years ago, I came on as an investor and CEO of MoviePass, which really was intended to do the same thing for cinema as we did for Netflix, and that is break down the barrier of discovering independent and foreign content in the theater. And unfortunately, we grew too fast. I never thought I'd have to say that, but we grew to 3.3 million paid subscribers in 8 months, and couldn't keep up with the technology, and so it imploded, and learned a whole lot of lessons, which I never want to learn again. But as Marcel said, I found what the really easy, fun job is going around the world, talking about disruption and innovation and the future of media, and that's up until COVID. That's what I've been enjoying doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Mitch. Learning from failure is part of the entrepreneurial journey, right? So it's important. So we will talk about that. And last but not least, Bill, everything from your side there.
Yeah, so like Mitch, I have failed many, many, many times, many more times than I've had successes, but you just have to keep trying. And I've sat in your seat many times as an entrepreneur. I started as a semiconductor chip designer and came out to Silicon Valley in the 80s when Apple and Intel were still kind of startups. And I joined a startup called LSI Logic that became a much bigger company later. And then I happened to go out to Taiwan and write a little business plan for a company called Taiwan Semiconductor, which today is, I think, the 9th most valuable company in the world, a $400-some billion market cap. I left there, went to a firm called Alex Brown, and had a wonderful job in the 80s of running around Silicon Valley looking for little companies that might get big. And I did the public offerings of companies that you've probably never heard of, but they were foundational at the time: Atmel, Zilog, Adaptec, XR, Cirrus Logic. And then I went into venture in 1991. So I've been funding companies for about 30 years. I've managed to have 22 go public, but that means that I've probably had 80 that haven't made it yet. And my most recent success is this product, Zoom Video, where I was the actual first investor in Zoom.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So I will start from Marcel because I met Marcel last December at Rise Up, and one of the first things he told me is we need to do something in Dubai. And then he came to Dubai, and when he came to Dubai, he talked about this idea of the pitch up in the sky, and it's happening, right? So no one better than him to share the story behind pitch up in the sky, what's going on, what will happen, and please.
So there's a little deeper meaning behind it. I was born and raised in Germany, a very conservative country. For those of you who might know it, I hated it. I had to escape at some point. Anyway, at 23, I was a medical student. And one of the things that I was at 23 most afraid of was actually flying. So I had a significant fear of flying. Back then, I went to one of my fellow students and he said, "Hey, have you heard about this job offered by a company in Munich?" I said, "What is it?" "It's called Medical Emergency Courier." I said, "What's that?" So these are the people delivering bone marrow for leukemia patients throughout the world. Very important job. And I figured, you know what? I don't like flying, or I'm afraid of flying, but if I take this job, then I can overcome it because it's not about me and my fear. It's about helping someone else. And I first called the company and I didn't get the job. They said, "No, we don't need anyone." And from that day on moving forward, I called every single day. The next week, I basically got an interview and I succeeded. And 2 weeks later, I was on my first international flight ever from Nuremberg, Germany to Frankfurt and then the Twin Cities in the US. It was at the time, it might sound silly to maybe all of you, unimaginable how one could fly 8 hours or so. And I did it back then and this really opened my life. From that point on moving forward, 4 months later, I actually took a vacation semester in medical school. I traveled around the world. I bought a round the world ticket and it really opened up my life. I've been traveling now to more than 75 countries. So overcoming fear and changing your life, reinventing yourself is in my DNA. And this event is just the extension of it. I've never done a skydive before and I'm just completely pumped and thrilled. And, the patients back then are the startup contestants today. If it wasn't for them, I would jump because it's about me keeping my composure and showing them, what's possible. And that's really the idea behind Pitch Up in the Sky. And Roberto and Noor, of course, were also one of the first to actually believe in this, as crazy as it might sound. But the idea here is this is an event, but the event could as well have been a startup company. So oftentimes early on, when you reach out with a more original idea, and I would argue that this is an original idea. It's not a copycat of anything. And, the US has taught me to think really original. And that's the one thing. So you need people like Noor and Roberto and Mitch and Bill to support this kind of crazy thing. And that's what I'm really proud of. And I'm happy to have all of you with me on that journey and also our startup contestants who we'll hear from later on.
Yeah, you will hear from them later on. What's going to happen then? What stage we are with the event?
So we've been through 5 rounds of live interviews with Noor, with Bill, with Roberto, with Mitch. Another friend of mine is Lars Rasmussen. He's the inventor of Google Maps. He was also part of our group. He's not joining today. And we had the semifinals, which happened, I think, about 2 weeks ago, where we selected our 3 semifinalists, all virtual to that point. And I think the unique element, besides combining extreme skydiving and business and entrepreneurship, is I managed to get TikTok on board as a social media platform. So everything was so far live streamed on TikTok. Our promo video has been viewed more than 740,000 times. And the final event is going to be live streamed on TikTok in the US, Europe, Middle East, and Africa on Saturday at 9 p.m. Dubai time. And then you can count back to all the other time zones. So that's the unique element, or the unique elements that I brought together.
That's awesome, amazing. And there is no better place than Dubai.
Absolutely.
This event.
Dubai is the country of firsts.
Yeah, awesome. So we will hear from the 3 finalists in a bit. But before that, it's not without a big emotion that I'm going to announce a little surprise that was not announced before for the event tonight. There is a special guest that was able to join us this evening, and it connects back to my roots. I'm originally from Milan, and I am a great AC Milan fan and supporter. And it's like when in San Siro, the speaker was announcing his name, so I don't have the same voice, but we have here with us Clarence Seidel. He's here with us. If you want to join us. Yeah, it's here, whatever you want to say, whatever you so he's going to talk to us tonight about leadership. You're also a great leader. Clarence, I'm just saying, there is someone in the room who was in Istanbul in 2005, so I'm just saying, I leave it to you,
Thank you so much for the invitation. Can we hear you with this? Yeah, it's okay. It's a pleasure and honor to be here again with such amazing people who definitely changed the world. Marcel, stop changing so fast. I always tell them, it's great to be part of an inspirational evening, I would say. I've been requested to have this speech. Normally I prepare myself a little bit, but sometimes I don't. And when I don't, I just go in the room and I feel. And I start connecting with the people, connecting with the things I'm hearing. And then I will have a message, because I feel that we have a lot of leaders, actually. A lot of important people who can reach out to a lot of people. And I think that the main importance that we have today is that we're going so fast with technology, right? And I just heard something about that sometimes we can go too fast. And if I look at the world, we need to make sure that everybody can cope and keep up with the speed that we're imposing. And it's not about money alone. It's really about how can we have impact in the life of other people by empowering them. And that has been one of the things that I kept with me during my career, actually, as a player. It was a bit crazy, because I was many times said, you're not a coach. Because I was always minding, other people's business, trying to support, trying to help what's happening, and being curious. And I never lost that spirit. And at the end of the day, that was one of the things that they appreciated at the end. Because when you care about the others, they give you something back. I've never had one player that would not run back for me if I was tired, when I had to make a run up front and I couldn't come back. I just had to make a look and they would do it for me, because when we're off the pitch, I would have that extra half an hour to just listen to all the things that are happening in his family and the problems that they have that many people don't care about. The leadership doesn't care about those things. They want to see the money, they want to see the performance, they want to see the goals, they want to see all of that. And I felt that really strong, that it has a really power in it. And I understood that when I finished playing, because those relationships with those players who were considered less important, because we're not I'm not talking about the big champions, because those have all their ego, they have the money, they have the fame, they have the capability and ability to cope with all the stress and the pressure and all the challenges that are coming. I'm talking about those who are more behind the scenes. We call them in Holland the water carriers. and those were the players that I would give more attention to, because they were needing that. When the game was tight and we came in the last minutes of the game, then I would make sure I would be available to get the ball from them, because I knew that they would not have the personality or the calmness or whatever it is to cope with that moment. So support, always in that support. The thing that I want to connect with is that once we have consciousness as a leader, that by supporting the others, they will give so much back to you. It becomes even also an interest. So either you do it of caring, or you do it for your interest. But we need to care and think about what people go through on a daily basis. And when I started coaching, I took this as one of my principles to coach. And managing people for me has always been to get the best out of the individual, to get the best out of the group. And still now I'm seeing, to just keep the metaphor with sports and football, that many managers are focusing on the group first. And then eventually we look at the individuals. And that's what's happening in the world of business. I'm not a 20 years expert in business, but I'm definitely an expert in people, because I've been working with the most difficult situations when you have 20 big egos in one room that need to go for the same goal and leave their ego aside, leave their personal interest aside, to accomplish something together. So in my DNA is to make sure that we reach that goal. It's not my goal because I will benefit from what we're going to do together, right? So this has been my approach as a coach, and I said, first the person, then the player. Because if the person is unhappy, he won't perform the same. So if I'm a leader of any company, I want to make sure I have an understanding, a very rough understanding, a real understanding of what is happening. Because when we know, we can act upon it. If I know what is happening in the life of a player and he's training like a piece of crap, I know why. Instead of criticizing him or her, I would take him out or take her out and try to get a talk and try to support and help. Because empowering people is not just by talking, we need to act upon it. I had a player at a certain point in my career as a coach that was shown to be very stubborn. He didn't want to do certain things. He was very, aggressive and not receptive to the things that the coaches were telling him. And at a certain point, it got to the nerves of the team. The team got really annoyed with that behavior. And I had to take a step back, just reminding myself of what I just said. I could just jump in and do the same thing as everybody, and also go and say, yeah, but you have to do this, why are you not listening? It's the why. Why is he behaving like that? Because it's against his own benefits. They're telling him something that he would benefit from, but he's still not doing it. At the end of the day, something really bad happened in his family. He was very introverted, didn't speak about it. He didn't have a father to speak about it. So he was actually the father of a family, very young age already. And all the things have impact on how he behaves, even in a professional life. Not everybody has the capacity to deal with such things and go still on the field. I consider myself really blessed. God gave me a lot of talents, and one of those was to perform under pressure better than when there was no pressure. I understand that. I worked on it for sure later, because I became conscious that this is something that I want to know why I have that capacity, others don't. So I started studying P&L and all of those things that we know, and tried to implement that on myself as a player and then as a coach, etc., etc. So I just want to share that we need to make sure that when we do our businesses, at the end of the day, it's our creativity that we're trying to express. What are we going to do with the money we get? How are we going to empower the people that are working for us? And when bad times come, you better have some credit with those who have to work for you, because then you know they will be there for you. Because that's exactly what happens in football, if I have to give you the metaphor. When the coach didn't care when things went well, he could not count on many of the players when he needed it, because he didn't care before. This is my message for tonight. I really thank you for everything, and I hope to see you soon again. Wish you all the best of luck. Great success for everybody, because if you're so successful, you can change the world for the better. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clarence. Beautiful message. Also, when you started talking about the beginning of your talk, not running too fast, right? Sometimes you have to slow down to go faster later, right? So you need to be aware of that. So with that, we can move on the finalists of the competition. So we will invite each of them to join us here. They will do a 3-minute speech, each of them, and then we will move on with the panel. So let's start, guys, if you want to come closer, but let's start with Alejandro. Alejandro from UMore, you want to join us?
For them.
Thank you for having me. So I'd like to speak a little bit today about UMore and myself, why I'm here.
Okay, yeah, always good.
Oh, sorry, Bill.
Sorry, no problem.
No, it's cool. So my name is Alejandro. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of UMore, and UMore is an AI-powered wellness app which is here to, like Clarence say, empower people. This is my first time here in Dubai and the UAE as well, and I find that there's a beautiful duality here between a country that has a rich cultural past, but also such a vision of the future. And when both of those occur simultaneously, I think it correlates quite a lot to what entrepreneurs have to do within their own ecosystem as well. When we look to solve future problems, we have to think about what has worked already in the past, maybe tweak it a little bit and see how that impacts the future. And we're seeing that today with coronavirus. we weren't ready for a future where the pandemic would hit us this hard. We didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't have the protection equipment, and also we didn't have the healthcare capacity to cope with all the infections which we did end up getting. And even though it's really inspiring to see how well we all came together to fight the effects of the pandemic, we're still left wondering what could have happened if we could have stopped it in its tracks. And I want to propose a different question. What will the next global pandemic look like? We're seeing that right now, because of the isolation that we all face, there's an increase to the poor economic security that many people face after losing their jobs. There's increased loneliness, and there's uncertainty, which is brewing stress and anxiety in the future. And all of this contributes to what I think will be the next global pandemic, and that's the pandemic of challenges related to wellness and well-being. So where does that leave us today? Well, we can look to the past to try and find better solutions. From the 2005 SARS epidemic, we saw that afterwards, research reported on a lot of people in Hong Kong that were looking for support that needed it as well. And that at the time wasn't being provided. So we think that if we can provide that and get ahead of the game here today in the world as we live in it, we can create a better future. And we think the success to do that is through an app that we're building called UMore. It works in 3 very easy steps. Firstly, we track stress and we record it using very valid scientific measures. Afterwards, we recommend tailored support to you to make sure that the impact that we can have in helping you combat your stress is as effective as possible. And then we've also built an ecosystem where you can share this information with your friends and family, so you can all stay updated together. And most importantly, even in times of isolation during the pandemic, as we see now, you'll be able to share that information. And collectively, by bringing together what we've already learned from the past, we can build a better future. Thank you.
Second in line is Layali from My Lily Box.
Hello everyone, my name is Layali Haddad. I'm the founder of My Lily Box. So I was raised and born in this region, and I had very limited resources when it came to my first period. And I had to talk to my mom, my friends about it. It was really embarrassing. Me and other girls in this region, we didn't have much education in schools about the first period that you're gonna have, which basically conducted a very bad habit. And I was really, fast forward from now, I was really privileged to work in e-commerce space, big company names, and I was focusing on the consumer journey, and I saw a very big gap in femme hygiene and healthcare. So I decided to build My Lily Box early this year and to focus on period essentials for every girl. So now, My Lily Box is a product where you customize your own box with the product's self-care essentials, and it's a subscription base every 2 months. And you don't have to worry about anything anymore as a female, and you will have it at your doorstep. And this is how I see this My Lily Box going into an app phase where I will have all the tracking apps together, and also would be an educational space. I wanted Lily Box to be a safe zone for every woman to share her experience and everything related to her period and non-period essentials. And that's it. Thank you so much.
And third, last but not least, Adam from One More. I will start because the guy is going to
Okay, we'll as well from back there, not from the front. Thank you very much. Sorry if I got back to you, Bill. So I'm Adam, and I run a company called One Moto, and I want to start with a quote. I did it last night, and the nerves got the better of me, but I'm going to do it again tonight. And that quote is, "We are the first generation to be affected by climate change, and the last to be able to do something about it." And when we think about change, we grow up, whether we like it or not, we grow up with change is something that happens to us. We just have to accept it. Is that a dodgy ringtone? We just have to accept it. But I actually believe change is something you can bring. And if you believe in any religion, you'll pay attention to Pope Francis. A couple of days ago, he endorsed electric vehicles. So I'm not saying it's putting a plaster on or putting a green plaster on anything. But what we do with Onemoto and our electric vehicles is bring change. We focus on 3 problems and we address them. We don't solve them, but we address them. But our major focus is environment, investment or profitability and time. And time is also relative to safety. So when you look at the environment, the 15,000 delivery vehicles that are in Dubai right now delivering us food and products and groceries and pharmacy every single day produce 16,500 tons of CO2 every year. Now, I can't imagine that you know what 15 or 16,500 tons of CO2 looks like. But if I said it was the same as 273,000 trees grown for 10 years just to absorb that little bit of CO2, quite a big amount, quite shocking. And if you think in Pakistan there's 20 million motorcycles, in India 37 million, in the UK 1.1 million, it's far greater than the little 15,000 that we have here. So we're focused very, very much on this region because a lot of the regional offices, as a company, I feel blessed that we only have 30 customers that will facilitate the entire region. And that also leads into Africa and South Africa as well. We've signed wonderful JVs with 53 of 54 countries in Africa because they believe in the electrification of vehicles. And over the years, people have said to me, like, Adam, you've been doing this for years, like, when are you launching? When are you launching? Why? And sorry, I'm not looking at you, Noor, but you're smiling at me, so that's great. People are asking, why are you doing this? And I've run a media agency in Dubai for the past sort of decade, and I thought, am I going to be doing this for the next decade? And I don't know whether I'm also coming to 40, I know, don't look it, but I thought to myself, am I going to be doing this for the next decade? And becoming a father at the end of last year, I really thought to myself, is there something that I can be doing that puts me on this earth to do something slightly better than it currently is being done? Can I make that change? Can I bring change? Can I make a difference? I really do hope so. So we've got a great team. It's a small team, but it's a great team. And one of the big sort of parts and one of the reasons why I applied for this absolute mad campaign and competition is sort of an element of notoriety for getting this far. Win or lose, that to me really doesn't matter. It sounds totally cheesy. It's the sort of thing your mum says to you. It doesn't matter if it's taking part that counts. But this really does mean the taking part because of the mentors, the advice, the empowerment and so on. So I'm just a guy with a brand called Onemoto focused on changing the delivery vehicles of this entire region and then beyond. One bike at a time, but I'm just one guy trying to make a big difference in this little planet of ours. Thank you.
Roberto, can I make one comment?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Guys, having heard you pitch right now just makes me so incredibly happy and proud. You have grown so much over the past 4 weeks, which was incredibly fast, right? You guys rock, seriously. I'm so, so happy. Alejandro, Adam, and Layali is so cool. We did it the first time, and I'm incredibly proud. Seriously, from the bottom of my heart, you rock.
Like that? Okay, you're all guys. No, thank you.
Thanks as well.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Layali. Thank you, Adam. You guys rock, and you're already winners. No matter how it will go in a few days, but you are already winners, and you have demonstrated courage, and you're brave. So best of luck. And what I love in your stories is that in all of your stories, what you're trying to do is there is an element of societal impact. So this human element, what you're trying to do, is going to have a big impact, in the life of potentially millions of people. So keep it up. So with that, we turn into the panel, and we might start talking a little bit first about the ecosystem here. No? We see that UAE is at the forefront of the innovation. UAE is a little bit the hub for a broader MENA region. I would start from Noor and then extend to all the others. Noor, you've been here for a long time. How do you see this ecosystem? How have you seen the ecosystem in the past years? How do you see this ecosystem going forward? in an honest way? What are the opportunities, but also what are some of the roadblocks that you still see?
So yes, I've been here for 25 years. It's about half the age of the country, I suppose now. It's a very interesting ecosystem. It started a long time ago. The first angel investment I made here was in 2009. The first company I started here was in 2006, and the first company my father started here was in 1996. So to say that entrepreneurship here is new is something that I would challenge. To say that tech entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship as we know it, and the word entrepreneurship is used in a very different sense than it was obviously 25 years ago when people started businesses and became business owners. The ecosystem is young, it's nascent. We often as VCs compare it to Silicon Valley in the 70s and the 80s, which is lovely as a VC because it means that you get to meet the founder, chat with them for 3 months, maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months, figure out if they're coachable, decide if you want to invest, see if they take advice, build a relationship, and then decide whether you want to invest or not. And more often than not, there's not enough capital. And so then as the capital provider, you have a lot of negotiation leverage. This is a result of the fact that we invest 0.02% of our GDP in venture, as opposed to 0.3% of our GDP, which is where the global standards are. So when you take that number, it makes sense. And what that means for us as a VC is that we get to really choose our founders. Last year, we saw 1,400 companies. We invested in 11. So when you take a look at those numbers, it starts to make sense as to why founders often don't get the best terms. Right? So we come in as a very founder-first friendly VC. We are very hands-on. We invest at a Series A stage, with the question being, how do I go from 2 million revenue to 20 million revenue in 2 years? And that's where our team can add value. So it's still a very young ecosystem. It has its challenges in the sense that there isn't enough capital. But that just means that the best founders still get funded. And as a VC, you have a much higher chance of success, if you will, because you're not competing to get into a deal. When we hear of stories, and I personally invest internationally a lot, and when we hear here's a term sheet, you have 48 hours, sign it or you lose the deal as a VC. We're like, no, that doesn't work in our ecosystem. Founders don't get to do that here with investors. It's really about building relationships. And that's where the cultural element comes in. The region is about long-term relationships. Venture and investing are no different. And when we work with founders, we expect to work with them for 5 or 10 years and really help them achieve their missions and their visions and see this as a really long-term relationship, not something we can decide about in 2 days.
Yeah, that's very true. Just an anecdote, once I was trying to set a meeting, it was April, and the guy replied, okay, let's meet in October, and say, wait a second, what do you mean October? Yeah, Ramadan is coming. Yeah, but Ramadan, then, and then there is summer, then, the schools start, so let's meet in October. So the pace and the relationship here is still different. So Marcel, Mitch, Bill, how do you see this from your perspective, from not living here? How do you see the ecosystem in the US or more mature ecosystem versus, from your experience, have you spent some days here?
Well, from my perspective, there's all kinds of great positives that I see here in that I see government, education, industry, all very excited about the opportunity. It's great. The tax laws here are fantastic. One of the things, and many of you probably know this, but one of the things that I think made Silicon Valley so successful is because it had all those things, but it had something else that very few other places have, and that is thousands and thousands of recent millionaires who were the janitors, the secretaries, the people who worked in the warehouses of Apple and Facebook, who were all willing to risk $25,000, $50,000 in crazy, pre-seed investments. And when you have lots of people willing to take risks, which for them are big, but more importantly for the startups, and we all know 99% of them fail, but the support for startups that caused, I think really created lots and lots of opportunities so instead of I think in Silicon Valley or San Francisco as a whole, there's over 2,000 VCs, which is, and I think $50 billion a year invested. And I think that's, if you can strive for that of making it easier and helping educate small investors to get involved, I think you can really kind of accelerate the environment. So that's the only thing I see missing here, but that's the same everywhere. I live in Mexico, and there's everybody I know. If it's not they can't fathom investing in ideas. They could, a building, yes, okay, I get that. I'll buy a building and I'll invest that way, or a ship or things. But ideas, are a much more difficult thing. So that's, I think, the whole education of young people and people with small amounts of money, I think, is an exciting opportunity.
It's an exciting opportunity. The average age across the broader East Africa region is really making a big difference. Maybe Bill, what's your point of view? You are on mute.
Gotta learn how to use that.
I do. Yeah, so I've always been focused on sort of the evolution of markets, because it is clearly the case that even if you can create a startup investing environment, if there aren't really waves to ride, a surfboard doesn't matter, right? So and I think what's really happened today is that there is a structural change in the markets that touches the Middle East and other places because of the evolution of technology. And when I came out to Silicon Valley in the 80s, it was called Silicon Valley because people were designing silicon. And it took a very, very specialized skill. It took hundreds of people per project in one place to design these things all in a building. And you couldn't really replicate that. And many, many governments tried for decades to recreate Silicon Valleys in their countries, and it didn't work because they didn't have, not the capital, they didn't have the social capital, the knowledge capital of the people that knew how to do that. And I think what's happened now is we've moved across several waves. It's a little bit like if you've ever seen the original, not the original Star Trek series, but the first Star Trek movie where Spock goes into that nuclear reactor and he pulls it out with his hands and he dies, and they have to bring him back to life. And they have this thing called the Genesis Project, where they unlock this Genesis Project, and what was a dark world sees this stream of green and light, and it spreads all over the world. And so we're kind of in that phase now. It started with silicon, and then it moved to the construction of boxes made out of that silicon. So computers, the routers, the switches, the hubs. And then people took those boxes and stitched those together, and that became the internet. And then after the internet, there was the interface on that internet infrastructure, is the fourth sort of wave of technology, where literally any kid in a dorm room could code up an interface and it might become Facebook. Or, somebody could, one coder in a building could do TweetDeck, or a few kids could do Twitter. And then it abstracted to this other layer of the data science that drives the knowledge of how to grow those and how to win. And so I think we're now at the point where everyone has access to the same foundational layer and can build on top of it. And I've had great experience, a great example would be the seed funding of Canva. I was in Perth, Australia on a kiteboarding trip, and I ran into a 19-year-old girl making high school yearbooks in her mom's living room. And I helped pair her up with a coder. That company out of a town, and Western Australia is very remote. It's more remote than where you are. It's landmass half the size of America with 3 million people in it. And so out of the far western corner of Perth, Australia, comes Canva, which is now doing $400 million annual recurring revenue at 70% gross margin. It's been profitable for 3 years out of a living room in Perth. So I think it is clearly possible anywhere in the world now if you've got a broadband connection. And I think there's no reason that all of you in the room there can't hit it with the right resources if you have the right kind of business that can scale across that internet.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Marcel?
Yeah, so what I've experienced, I traveled extensively to all the startup hubs actually over the past year in particular. I've been to Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, etc. And what I found impressive is that if you have a good network, the region itself, but I think applies globally as well, you can get easily to sort of the key people within each of the markets. And I would say I'm a good connector. I genuinely care about people. I think they probably would actually reciprocate as well. And the fact, that you can develop these really meaningful relationships, which is less transactional than in the US, but more relationship-based here, gives access to incredible possible deals or opportunities. And it's easier because I also feel like the region is very open. And Mitch and I experienced this today to foreign knowledge and talent and access. And this alone actually gives you a really great opportunity if you have the right product or service to offer. And I think this is something that really accelerates because in the United States, let's say I live in Boston, you're one of so many. The question is, do you want to be a small fish in a very big pond or the other way around? I would rather pick the other way around. Why would I go where everyone is competing actually for deals like Boston, healthcare, MIT, Harvard? I mean, there are so many. I would rather put the money here with this extra, maybe you might call it unfair competitive advantage of maybe the right background, the right people. But I would rather do that than going where everyone else is going. That's my take. Also to Bill's point, etc., Perth, Australia. So that's my take on the region.
Awesome, and Marcel, talking about investment, and both Mitch and Bill, you mentioned before you have been going through some failures. But the reality is you have also been very successful, right? So what would be the number one thing that you would consider when you evaluate an investment opportunity? Is it team? Is it the unit economics? Is it the opportunity itself? Let's start from Mitch.
Yeah, well, geez, there's the whole list of obvious ones. Who are the people? How passionate and determined are they? I learned early. You might have heard this story, but when we came up with the idea for Netflix, we all went home to tell our wives about the idea. We were going to put DVDs in a red envelope and we were going to mail them to people. And we all went home. Reed went to Santa Cruz, Mark went to Scotts Valley, I went to Mill Valley. We all told our wives, and my wife and my kids said that they thought that was the stupidest idea in the world. Why would you mail DVDs when there's a video store on every corner? And I called Mark, and Mark said, geez, my wife said the same thing. and we thought, oh, geez, what are we doing? And I realized at that point, and I've said this many times, is I learned that trying to prove your wife wrong was incredibly motivating. And I think one of the things you look for in a startup founder, or ideally founders, because I think two people working together is a lot better. It's at least 3 times better than one person. You look for people who are on a mission to make it work no matter what, whether it's pivoting or solving problems. So I think that's number one, but that's still not enough. It's is it? I think as Bill points out, is it a scalable idea? Because no one wants to invest in something that's going to stay small. You look. How experienced are they? There was a study recently, or maybe a year ago, that was done by the Council of VCs in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they found that 2 founders had a lot higher success rate than one. First-time founders had more success than second-time founders. And you know, so you look for all those things. You know, unfortunately it's never the same. You know, never the same thing. But and I think Noor, you pointed out one thing is you know, money eventually is going to be a problem, and so you really look to see who else is going to support this endeavor, because ultimately you don't want to be the only kind of bank, you know, to keep them going.
Yeah, Gil, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, I can relate to Mitch's story, because I was a partner at IVP, and we were the original seed in the Series A of Netflix, and it's a much longer funny story, because after it got seeded, I can't remember the exact timing, but the market started to you know, the internet bubble started to like fade a little bit. And here was this company that was taking venture capital dollars, turning them into inventory of DVDs, mailing them out, and a significant number of them would never come back. And the churn rate was very high. And I it was 18% a month at the point that there was a re-up. And I remember that because I had a little bit more financial background, because I had been at Alex Brown than the other partners. And the partners wanted to put me in a place to analyze it, to stop it. and after we seeded it, you know, I'm looking at this thing thinking, holy shit, you know, they're basically taking venture money, mailing it out, and it doesn't come back. And sign up, they steal the DVD, and then they quit the service. I was like, this is not going to go anywhere. And TCV was one of the main lead investors, and they had put so much in, they didn't want to see it fail. So there was this kind of like, I don't remember if it was a down round or it was a rescue round, where no one would fund it unless everybody funded it. And if any one of the funds didn't fund it, the whole round would have been dead. And we ended up funding it, and it lived. And I think, you know, they obviously changed, and Reed is very famous for saying they didn't call it Netflix because they were going to mail DVDs forever, right? And so he could see the internet coming. And I remember when it got funded, originally it was because one of the partners at IVP, Tim Haley, had known Reed from his prior company, Pure Atria. And it was nothing more than a bet on a winner in a different category who was trying something completely new in an area he didn't really know, you know, and boy, did that turn out to be a really good bet. I still have never sold my shares that I received from that seed distribution, but you know, this brings up a bigger subject, which is what you asked originally, what do you look at? And I was very, very fortunate to have on the board of my very first startup I joined, LSI Logic, was one of the key board members was Don Valentine. Don, of course, founded Sequoia Capital. And if you haven't heard of Sequoia, they're kind of the name in the space. And Don individually was the backer of Apple, LSI Logic, Oracle, Network Appliance, chairman of Cisco. So in like Electronic Arts, in 10 investments, the market cap of those companies is over $1 trillion. So he's very, very good. And when I went into the venture business, I basically tagged along with him and funded things with him. We were both in a company called Microchip together, and I got stuck at an airport in Phoenix after a board meeting because the flight was canceled, and we had dinner. And I remember that because I was new in the business, and I asked Don, I said, so Don, what does it take to be successful in this business? What do I have to do? What do I have to know? And Don, if you've heard stories about him, he passed away last year, but if you hear stories about him, he's a very terse, very kind of harsh person. And he answers things in very short sound bites, and very efficient at everything he does. And his answer to me was very simple. He said, Bill, you only have to get 3 things right: markets, management, capital structure. You do those three things right, you'll make money every time. And then I couldn't help but to kind of drill down on that. And what I distilled from a conversation was, it's really about being in a big market that is well-timed, meaning that you are going through a structural change where a little player has an equal chance as a big player that's going to be caught up in their own legacy. The second is, a management team. You've got to have somebody that's good. And as Mitch described, somebody that's like willing to power through it. And the last is you can't mess up the capital structure. Oh, actually, when he said it, it's like, you got to be in a big market, have the right team. If it's the wrong people, you swap them in and out till it works, and don't overpay, and you'll make money every time. And on the capital structure, it's really about having business models that are not so cash consumptive that even if the business works, you don't make money, or there's a gigantic amount of financing risk because the P&L doesn't make sense. And over time, I think what's worked for me is kind of that model, which is I look for markets that are coming where there is a structural change and it feels like it's well-timed. And then you're kind of looking for the rider, right? Who's going to ride that surfboard and ride it well? And then you want to just make sure that you capitalize it right. And in markets that are big with dynamic change, you get multiple shots because people are interested in it. If you're in a stale, old, mature market, the financing risk is a lot higher. So being in dynamic, interesting markets with an entrepreneur that is wired right makes a big difference. So that's kind of it. Markets, management, capital structure.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Noor, anything to add, Marcel, to what Mitch and Bill said?
I would agree fully. It kind of drives our thesis, especially right now when we take a look at digital health and emerging markets. It's an industry that we just like to say it has a lot of tailwind, right? And the crisis just accelerated that. We have 1.5 billion people in the region. And most of them are going to go from no doctor to teledoctor, like we were talking about yesterday. Most of them will go from no diagnostics to remote diagnostics. So the leapfrogging that we anticipate over the next 5 to 10 years in digital health and health tech, driving healthcare inclusion, is very similar to the last 10 years in financial inclusion. And that was a wake-up call from a financial crisis. This is a wake-up call from a healthcare crisis. So our thesis is very much driven on, it's the market. Half our fund is for digital health at this point in time, and we're backing 8 players in this space across the value chain. And it's really about providing more people access to huge market, multiple shots. And then it's about who are we backing? Everybody has amazing expertise in the industry, but you wouldn't want the doctor running the fund. You want a surgeon building the company. So it's very much exactly that. And the capital structure is, unfortunately, in the region, the thing we have the most challenge with. We've spent 7 months on one deal just restructuring the cap table because of earlier angel investors that have limited expertise in angel investing. So that's where a lot of the venture time goes here for the investors. But I completely agree. It's all about the founders, the founder.
Yeah, totally agree. And you kind of anticipated the next question, which is, say, you can get $50 million to invest in early stage startups with an time horizon of the next 10 years. Which 2 industries would you pick? Maybe Marcel. Well, I guess digital health, right? Looking at Marcel.
What we spoke about yesterday in basically continuation of to piggyback on what Bill said about markets and what Noor said about digital health. I think this is a gold rush time for digital health. Digital health itself, in terms of what the smartphone and wearables have brought as an ecosystem to actually thrive or make digital health thrive, is basically right now in the mainstream. It has arrived, not because of anything external other than the pandemic. The COVID-19 has led to an appreciation at a global level where the world has faced challenges, right, unlike any time before. And let's face it, we were completely unprepared at a global level. We talk about buzzwords such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, but this crisis has brought us back to pen and paper. To give you a simple example, going to the airport, you still have to fill out basically a form. Those kind of things really show you where we actually are. So we said yesterday, and that's sort of the bottom line of where healthcare is today, it's no longer a matter of if, but only when it's going to be implemented. And I think the region is a perfect place. Also, to Noor's point, I think emerging markets in particular have a huge appetite. And these internet or digital businesses have one very big advantage. Most of them are not very capital intense. And you actually can really make a whole lot of things work with a smaller amount of capital because of the capital costs in general here in the region. And you can reach actually millions of people that actually don't necessarily have the means to buy advanced, fancy healthcare services. So any kind of business model in the digital health space that is scalable to millions and millions of people in Africa and the Middle East is going to be a success if they have the right team and also the right capital and investors behind it with certain expertise. But I think it's a gold rush time for healthcare. So I would literally drop everything else and just focus on healthcare. Seriously.
Yeah. So healthcare,
of course, there are other areas.
Mitch, do you have any other industry that you think are appealing or sexy looking at the next 10 years?
I'm the absolute worst person to ask. I have no idea. Every time I think I know the answer, I realize I don't. Personally, I do like the food business and coming up with vegetarian or the use of non-animal foods, and so I like that whole science of food, and it's a big market and it's a fascinating one. But all I know is that the world keeps changing, and it keeps changing too fast for me to know what's next.
Yeah. Food is one of those things it's the same thing when I talk to my wife. She doesn't believe that she's more traditional on that. Bill, what's your point of view? You have any?
Yeah, I think I'll answer. Yes, on two dimensions. I'd say within the tech sector, this series of waves that I described, every wave builds on the prior waves and is bigger and grows faster. So like I said, we started in silicon. Those were like little Lego blocks to power the building of comm equipment that then powered you took those boxes and put them together to make the internet. And then the overlay, which is the UI companies like, Twitter, Facebook, Google, whatever. And then the data science wave really started from that wave. So it's the people that could really understand what was happening from a true analytical perspective, one in their categories. And that type of data science is now starting to blossom throughout the world. So, it was really just the web companies in the beginning. As you look at the physical businesses now, they're all adopting it, or I should say the winners who have adopted it win, and the ones that do not will be dead in the next 8 to 10 years. And you could look at older industries like retail, Sears and JCPenney. They're basically floating piles of inventory where a fashion buyer would go out and pick, tens of millions of dollars of things to sell. And at Christmas, they may or may not have sold. Walmart is a data science cloud with point of sale terminals on the end of it. Transportation, very inefficient fleets of cars. Uber is a data science cloud with cars on the end of it. Airbnb is a data science cloud with rooms on the end of it. Versus fixed cost buildings kind of sitting there with unpredictable demand in the old hotel business. So what I see happening is the entire world's businesses are going to be remade from the inside out by a change in leadership, where companies like Netflix, in a way you could argue, is run on data science. They have inventory that matches their consumer in a real-time way very efficiently because they are a master at data science. And so I think that wave, we're probably like 6 to 10% of the way in. And I think there's going to be ample opportunity over the next 20 years to just remake all of commerce. And then I think, to Mitch's point, the other massive wave that I think is very important is the general trend towards sustainability. And if you look at where this next generation's heads at on what they are willing to buy and consume, what the brand that they're buying from or not stands for matters. And so what the capital markets seem to be signaling is, if you have a brand that really is positive for this planet, you get a premium. People are interested in that product. Beyond Meat is a great example of that. Tesla is another example of that. Of course, there's some, other technical stock things where, too many people are short Tesla for it to go down anymore, but Netflix was like that too for a long time. But I think we're in a world where doing well by doing good matters more every day. So I think those are the two areas that I focus on.
That's awesome. And that reflects also how consumers are changing today, becoming more curious, demanding, impatient. They want their brand to predict even what they want, right? But on the other hand, consumers and the new generation are more into the purpose. So your message on sustainability is really great. But thinking about the region, Mitch, you talked before about first-time entrepreneurs. So in the region, it's a younger population. So what would be your advice for early-stage young entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs that maybe started their new venture during the COVID, the pandemic, and maybe they raised their first pre-seed or the funds, and then they used the money, and then in this uncertainty they might not know what to do or how to survive. What would be your advice for them?
Well, there's so many things you could give advice about, but it's definitely creating a support system. You can't do it alone. Reaching out to experts and I think every wrong decision I've made was made without asking other people for advice. So I think it's asking for advice and trying to keep momentum. Trying to ensure that momentum is good for keeping your team excited. It's good for keeping your investors supportive and your customers expecting more. So figuring out how to not lose momentum, by running out of money or things going wrong. So many things. But I think it's asking for help. When I was president of Redbox, we would bring in some organizational psychologists, and I'll never forget this one test they had us do. We all the executive team blindfolded ourselves, and there was a rope course wrapped around a bunch of trees with tools tied to it, and we were told to put our hand on the rope and walk around the rope and try to figure out how to get off the rope. And we're all going around, and eventually, and one by one, we started saying, "So how do we get off?" We would say it out loud, and the whole trick was asking for help. And after about 30 minutes, there was still one person who wouldn't ask for help, and it was just an indicator. You've got to be willing to admit mistakes, to learn from them, to do an open post-mortem on the mistake and ask for help. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's very important. And more importantly, I would say in an increasingly uncertain world, as a leader, also being comfortable not having all the answers, right? Yeah. Because it's the world changed significantly and it's more uncertain. Yeah. Noor, what's your point of view? How would you help, or what would you tell these early-stage entrepreneurs?
I think anyone who ventures out on the entrepreneurship journey has to be very driven. I'm driven by a passion, driven by a purpose that goes beyond money. I think that the second your purpose or your passion is a dollar sign, stumbling blocks seem much higher, and anything that's in your way seems something you cannot overcome. When driven by passion, purpose, and really you find your zone of genius and you see that twinkle in the founder's eyes, and when they're talking about their company, an hour for them feels like 2 minutes, that's when you know that there's someone who really is going to do this no matter what. I always joke that, they would do their job for free, and often they do, right? And I think that's the founder, that's the purpose. And so pandemic, no pandemic, we've seen founders go through this pandemic, and just come out the other side stronger. In our portfolio, we have 20 companies, and 85% of them, September was their highest revenue months. So gone through the pandemic, come out the other side, but these founders, nothing's going to stop them. Right? And those are the founders that genuinely believe in their purpose and their mission, and they want to change the world, make the world a little bit of a better place, and deliver their service and their product because it matters. And it matters to them and it matters to everyone around them. It's not just about dollars. It's about value, not valuation.
Yeah. And Marcel, what's your point? And also, as a founder, when would you realize that it's enough? Or, when things are not going well?
So the first one is actually to what Mitch said, support network, and specifically focused on the region. As a first-time founder, looking back, and I said it yesterday, I'm open about it, I was full of myself. In the medical world, I was on top. I could have done anything. The world was open to me. I was at Johns Hopkins, so the world was open to me. And having become a founder again, there was a huge black hole. And I realized very quickly that I'm nothing. Because it's not about what you did in the past, but what you're doing today and what you will do tomorrow. Entrepreneurship, unlike anything else, is all about merit, performance. If you are not goal-oriented, you will die. Either a sudden death or a very slowly, surely progressive death. So the point that I'm trying to make is, as a first-time founder, to Mitch, you need a support network. And what I found in the region is there are many very ambitious efforts to build that support network through accelerators and incubators. But I think this might be maybe an early way, and there will also be a maturity necessary in this kind of support network. Oftentimes founders and that's the worst possible example I can give. Hey, if you give me money, I'll make the idea work. That is probably the worst thing that one can say, because that means you don't know what you're doing in the first place. If you need my or our money or whatever, then you will never get it done in the first place. So get something done, show some traction, right? So, and also Mitch and I discussed it at length today. There's a maturity necessary actually on two dimensions. On the one hand, the support system for entrepreneurs, and this can be anything through mentorship, provided through accelerators, incubators, you name it. But also there's a maturity, to Noor's point earlier, on the investor level, because Noor can only become active if some stupid guys or ambitious guys invest early on. Because without these early investors, wealthy people in particular, nothing is going to happen. But they don't know how to invest. They don't know how to get access to deal flow. They don't know actually what it would take to make an investment. So we need to educate on two levels. And this is also how you build a very healthy and hopefully successful, mature ecosystem. So it's maturity on both sides. And that requires both entrepreneurship or entrepreneur education as well as investor education. That's, in my opinion at least, how you can build a more sustainable, long-term sustainable ecosystem. It's not just having the next accelerator incubator, but having something that really, really works. These are my 2 cents.
This is great. One question is, you are all great investors. How do you look at balancing ethics with economics? Meaning, let's say you come across a pitch that is, say, ethical sketchy, but you think it's a $1 billion opportunity. Would you look more at the responsibility to society because of the ethics, or would you look at the responsibility to your fund because of the opportunity? How would you balance that?
Can I go first? I had one thing. I'm going to keep it very short. This is my personal opinion. There's someone, I'm not going to name him, but he's from the region, well known. He said, early on, when you start businesses, you have to be willing and you have to have the confidence to operate in a gray area, because you won't grow exponentially if you're not willing to take certain risks. And so in a gray area, okay? Whatever that takes in that particular kind of business. Now, I need to take it one step further. If you're in healthcare, you can't do that. That's not possible. But there's certain other industries where you're more likely to do that. In healthcare, there's just too much regulatory obstacles to be considered. But these are sort of two things. You need to be willing to take some risks, to push a few boundaries here and there, to leapfrog. That's just my opinion.
So we don't negotiate on ethics. So for us, it's very clear. We believe, especially we're fortunate enough to work in a region where the opportunities to invest are abundant. So we're not in a position where, well, if you don't do this deal, you're going to sit on capital and there's nowhere to put that capital. We had the opposite problem. There isn't enough capital. But in healthcare in the region specifically, there's more gray than I've ever expected. And I think that it actually comes down to, it's not about the grades, the regulation doesn't exist yet. So one of our companies, which has 20 million unique visitors a month for Arabic healthcare content, is called Utubbi. And they did content, then they allowed booking, then they allowed teleconsultation in February. And they've gone from 200 teleconsults a day in Egypt, and they operate across many markets, to 15,000 a day in Egypt. And they are the government's arm for answering any questions regarding COVID. But telemedicine is not yet allowed in Egypt. So you get to a point where, wait, I have a government contract for something that's not yet allowed, but it's not disallowed. So is that a gray area, or is that regulation hasn't yet caught up with technology, right? So you have to take a call, and as long as you believe that you're not going against the law does not yet exist because regulation always catches up to technology. Then you're in a position to say, okay, I believe in the technology, I believe it's doing good. They're not crossing any lines. It's not a gray area. The box has not yet been defined. So you're not outside the box or inside the box. This is how we see it.
I want to add one thing to that. So there's another friend of mine, I cannot mention his name, but he's very well known, a very big investor.
He's in this room.
He once, he's not in this room. He once actually brought me in and he said, hey Marcel, here are a few companies. And there was one company, and I put on sort of my German hat because it was in the sort of larger telemedicine space. And then he said, and I just started curiously asking questions and said, well, if the doctor received that request, and that request actually turns out to be, in terms of a second opinion, turns out to be wrong, there's liability, right? I mean, if you are doing it, he said, Marcel, we're in the Arab world. It's inshallah. I mean, you can, it is. And I was like, pardon me, what? Like liability? No, things happen. And that was the kind of conversation. I mean, imagine, I was like sitting there, I said, pardon, what? Like rewind, I was jet lagged and a little bit tired. But that's probably the kind of gray area. It was in Egypt, actually, that kind of conversation. But I was a little bit, well, it's medicine. I mean, it's more serious than delivering food. But that's the kind of conversation I had when it came to liability. I was like, okay.
No, once I was in a pitch where the founder replied to a similar concern that he was not against the law. It was just before the law. Before the
The regulation's not up to technology.
But it's a fair point, right?
It's a fair point, yeah.
Let me unmute first. So it's non-negotiable. I think, the thing about the startup world is there are so many companies out there to choose from and so many people that you might want to back. You're looking for reasons to say no. And if integrity is an issue at all, it's out. So it's very simple for me. And in the end, you guys are all going to learn that in the long, long, long run, what people will remember you for is not, what hit you had or what you did, but they're going to remember if they trusted you or not. And it all comes down to integrity and the way you handle yourself and what decisions you make, what drives your judgment. And if you have a strong reputation for integrity, it will always help you.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a great message. People don't remember what you do, but mainly remember how you make them feel and if they trust you. Mitch, just to close on.
Yeah, well, it's definitely non-negotiable, but I would need 10 hands to count how many times I've been in a situation where what we did, somebody interpreted as not being done correctly. I've had, $600 million class action suits against us at Redbox, where we said, just as an example, we said, all movies are $1 a night, no late fees ever. And we got a $600 million class action suit saying, oh no, that second dollar is a late fee. But we said no late fees ever. And so, I think the challenge, I think all of us in our business have faced times where somebody interpreted what you did differently than and with less integrity than what you thought. And it's how you deal with those. We had at one time the people from the American Disability Act sue us. At this point, we had 20,000 kiosks, in Walmarts and Walgreens, etc. And they sued us because our touchscreen was too high to access. The top part was 3 inches higher than was possible for someone in a wheelchair. That, things you never intended to happen, but you end up having, to deal with those. But I think, Bill and Noor and Marcel are all right from exactly right as, at the outset. It's especially the founders and the team. You can't have a team that is going to cut corners.
Yeah, beautiful. I would say thank you. Before opening up for questions, maybe just I would ask each of you one simple message for Alejandro, Layali, and Adam. As and Marcel, you're also going to jump from that place. So one message for them as encouragement, or whatever you want to tell.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
I think it's one day at a time.
The journeys are really, really long, and they feel very painful all along the way, with lots of highs, lots of lows. But if you can live through it, it's just grand. So stay with it.
Yeah, I would say something like that too, but make sure you really have fun and enjoy the ride, because if you lose that joy that you get out of it, then you'll give it up.
Yeah. And one way, to evaluate a company is also when you enter the door, if you see people smiling, right? So have fun is also very important.
I'm sorry, just one other thing. One time I was talking, and I'm sure, Bill, Tony Shea at Zappos, and I asked him, because I couldn't, he sold his company for $1 billion to Amazon, and yet he stayed working. And I asked him, why did you do that? And he said, because I love working in a place that I can create the culture, create a place I love going to work. And that's, one of the best opportunities you all have is creating a place where you want to go to work. And so make sure you surround yourself with really fun people and smart people.
Awesome. I am the worst person to keep time, so I don't know how we're doing with time, but let's open up for questions. Anyone who wants to ask any question to any of the panelists.
Well, thank you very much for a very enlightening evening, and a pleasure to meet everybody. On the question of ethics and technology, you talked about laws, but doesn't ethics and technology go beyond laws? And what do you actually do to consider the social impact negatively of the projects that you're looking to invest in?
Well, I guess I'll add, from my perspective, the least enjoyable part of my work in the past is having to spend more and more time with lawyers, evaluating every step, every new nuance to the product. So, and I think it's understanding, the law, but also working as close. You end up needing lobbyists, and you end up needing to be proactive if you have a good reputation and you have credibility and you work closely with the government or the regulatory agencies, you can help them evolve the regulations. And there's been numerous times where I've been involved in trade associations where, we work to help evolve the law, especially in the changing technology. Today, the whole privacy issues, with almost every company on the internet is a huge challenge. And so figuring out, the future of that is mind-boggling and very dangerous depending on the country you're in.
Is it a question about law or obligation to society?
I think it's a matter of responsibility within society.
Yeah. What is the impact? So I have many thoughts on this, and none of them positive. But I think that as these corporations grow bigger and stronger and have more influence over your actions or an average person's actions than the government does, and has more data about you than a government does, and as society and the predictive analysis goes to a point where not only do they know about you, but they probably know about what you're going to do and the choices you're going to make and all these things. I'm sure many people here have watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix. I mean, if you take it a couple steps further, and with the recent pandemic, and I'm not worried about COVID, I'm worried about the implications in 15 years. And what I mean by that is I see a future where if everybody has their DNA sequenced at birth, and the government can only afford to educate half their population, then half goes uneducated based on a lottery of a DNA sequencing, right? And how do you do that for 7 billion people over 2 years? This pandemic is a great opportunity, and then that information is currently with these privacy laws, and every country has its own laws, but someone who comes tomorrow and says to prevent a bioterror attack, or we suddenly need to open up this data, you get to a point where, I don't want to say Gattaca is the future, but it's not far from that. So my concern lies around where this data sits today is very different to where this data has been sitting in 5 years. How this data is used today is very different to how it's been sitting in 10 years. And it's not about which coffee I'm going to choose at Starbucks. It's about the grander scheme of data. And so for me, if you take a look at crises historically, with every crisis, we lost something. We lost our communication privacy, now we're losing our health privacy, and the future is like privacy, the right to choose. So even if you take a look at the generations that we have now, it's very much a push generation, not a pull generation. I'll tell you what you're gonna watch on YouTube. I'm gonna suggest things. And future, take these people 10 years out when they're in the workforce. Let me tell you what you should do with your time to earn a living. Let me tell you how to upskill yourself. In the future, someone will open up their phone and say, go Uber or the equivalent for 2 hours, and then Barista for 3, and then X. And effectively, you've turned this generation or people using data that we now believe is so useful to make our lives easier into a generation that doesn't think, that has no rights, because they're not educated, because we never educated them. So that's where, if you want to take a very doomsday scenario, right? So our role as investors and our role in society is, can we find the ethically driven founders that are actually going to try to make a change by the way they're constructing the technology, by the ethics behind AI? I mean, a perfect example is the company Numa, right, which is based in the UK, which does a lot of this data on the genetics side and is trying really hard to work with regulators and lawmakers to ensure that this can only be used in the way that is intended, right? And not in a malintended way 10 years down the line. So it's the role of the investors and the regulators and the legal profession at this point in time to ensure that as this data has the potential to become so detrimental in the future, we put in now checkpoints to make sure that that doesn't happen. And this is the time to put those checkpoints. This is the time to find mission-driven founders, not the ones that are driven by dollars, and to really back them and support them and the lawyers.
If I can make one quick comment. I introduced Noor, actually, I'm very proud of that, a while back to a founder who, in my opinion, is one of the most ethical founders I've ever met. It's a company based out of Berlin named Clue. Maybe some of you know it's a period tracker. So it's a friend of mine. I was introduced through another German fellow to her, and she's literally one of the most ethical founders. They have turned down many revenue opportunities because it didn't feel right. They have others who have made more revenue faster, but they compromised the value of the data. And I think we really hit it off with Ida, who's the CEO. It's just one example of, in my opinion, very ethical founder, but also very ethical company overall.
And interestingly, on the data side, so I'm now a chairperson for
So I learned.
So I'm not an investor, just at Berkeley, so I'm an independent chair, but the investors are amazing. And the Union Square Ventures and NGP, it's a fantastic company. But the data, they're working really hard with other large, very large companies to make sure that data is no longer stored at cloud. It's stored in your device. And let's see how we can use quantum computing to enable the same kind of machine learning to happen on a device level, not a cloud level, so that we don't have these problems in the future. So there are companies that are going down that road to say, you own it, it's in your pocket. If you destroy it, we don't have a copy. But there are many others that are not going.
Thanks for the question. Great question. Bill. Oh, yeah, sorry, Bill. Yeah.
Yes, sure. Yeah, actually, I'm actually dealing with this right now. Yeah. So the last company I co-founded is a company called Treasure Data. And it's a data science company that, among other things, was the engine behind product recommendation engines at companies like Wish.com. And with one click, so when you go to Wish.com, you register through Facebook, and with one click, we basically would enter and take all of your profile information and examine the linkages between you and other people to infer, who you were, what your rough age was, gender, interests, and then from that we would populate that data, produce the population of the Wish.com page. And it was an interesting thing because we knew a lot about the engine, knew a lot about people, and we ultimately, we sold the company to SoftBank more for its IoT data science stuff, but along the way, we ran into the folks from Cambridge Analytica, and we did exactly the same thing that they did. We steered products; they steered votes. Through, and it wasn't the actual vote, but it was the analysis of interest, that same methodology that steered ads, not for products but for votes. And I'm in it again. I just took the core data science team out of Cambridge Analytica, and we started a new company called Dyad. And it's an interesting thing because we still have that capability to do all the stuff that we did, but this time we're going to abstract it. So the responsibility, I'm taking this engine and taking it away from the consumer area and focusing it on enterprise. So I think as an investor and I think oftentimes technology people, they're pushing the edge on technology, they're agnostic and unaware of what the ethical implications might become later. I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg sitting in his dorm room wasn't thinking someday that his actions would help get Trump elected. It probably didn't even enter his mind. And so I think as technology becomes more pervasive, in the same way that Noor is talking about the genetic data, there's a lot that can be done with it to influence other people or kind of be big brother. And think about all the cameras around everywhere in China monitoring people's behavior and the social loyalty scoring. They call it credit scoring, but it's loyalty scoring to the government. That kind of stuff is pretty dangerous. So technology is one of these things where because it can go deep and scale in ways that prior waves of technology never could, it can either destroy things really quickly or be a force for good, depending on how you kind of control that. And I think it is important for all of us in this modern era to be aware of that and to try to steer it for the better, because if we don't, it could accelerate the demise of a lot of things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, I think we opened up a conversation that could be way longer given the topic.
Its own panel.
Its own panel, yeah. Any other question from the audience, from our guests?
Yeah, quick one. Okay, that's a live question. So for early stage founders, should they focus on product or market or balanced?
Revenue.
Nice. Which stage of early? Pre-seed, seed?
Revenue. Your first client is more important than your first investor. Yes. Your first customer is key. And that is product market fit. So you can't pick product or market. It's the fit.
Yes.
Cool. Any other question? If not, we will end the session. I guess we are done. It's been a long session, and thank you everyone. Thank you, Marcel. Thank you, Noor. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mitch. It's been an amazing conversation.